Merry Christmas. This is Nini. We have been promising to host guests on the Breaking Script podcast, and today is that day. You get to meet our first guest. Today's episode starts with an interview and a profound conversation about topics like betrayal trauma, covert abuse, and cognitive dissonance, and more. But don't worry if that sounds heavy, we still review a Hallmark Christmas movie, and today's is one of my favorites. And even though today's episode is a little different from our regularly scheduled program, we've wanted to introduce you to guests with practical resources that can help support you on your journey of life on some of the topics that we talk about, and especially with self-care and mental health in mind. We even have our brand new Christmas movie watching journal with the updated unique segments for the way home. But most importantly, it has a holiday self-care menu complete with step-by-step how-to guides for basic breathwork, grounding, and even vagus nerve toning exercises. It'll help you keep your chill through the holidays. And even though we don't have our usual audio spa summary for you today, I think the betrayal trauma conversation may still have the same effect for some of you, believe it or not. And if it just seems too heavy for you, feel free to skip to the movie review at the end of the episode today, so you can still grab your cup of chair and break script with us. Welcome back to the Breaking Script podcast with Lala and Nini. And actually, it's just Nini today with a very special guest. This guest, I'm actually her number one fan, but I have to be honest, she's been our podcast's number one fan because she has given us the most feedback. Honestly, I feel like this woman has single-handedly kept me going and encouraged. I am so honored today to introduce Heidi Mills, who is a certified life and relationship coach. After experiencing complete burnout due to a relational crisis several years ago, Heidi jumped into the vast pool of healing modalities. She's come out with less certainty and far more gratitude for how our minds and bodies miraculously heal. And she hates writing bios, but loves to help people get unstuck and restore joy, belonging, and connection in their lives. When she's not coaching or writing, you can find her running amok with her husband, 6 kids. Yes, you heard that right. There's 6 of them. Favorite dog Max and kitten Toby in the Texas Hill Country. Welcome, Heidi.
Thank you, Nini. I am so over the moon to be here. I am. I probably am the number one fan of the Breaking Script podcast, and I love that title. Thank you.
Heidi came along in my life when you're starting to learn how to be trauma-informed and somatic-informed and hold space for yourself, you need so much more validation from the outside to slow down and to hold that space for yourself. And she came into my life when there's not a whole lot of voices out there. It's sometimes hard to find. And so I thank you so much. It's been invaluable. We're going to dive right in, though, and talk about you today. So our format when we have guests on our podcast are going to be a little bit different. The first half is going to be all about our guests and what they offer, maybe their favorite self-care or mental health advice, whatever their area of expertise is in this as it relates to self-care, mental health, those kinds of things. And we're still going to review a Hallmark movie, but our first half is going to be about them. So we're going to dive into it. What led you to what you're doing now as a certified life and relationship coach?
Well, first I want to say thank you, Nini, for all of those kind words. I feel very much the same about you. What led me to become a certified life and relationship coach in the short version is a whole lot of relational trauma.
Yeah.
But I can't just leave it there. That'd be funny. But I think it culminated in when I hit complete burnout was several years ago when I discovered that my husband had had an emotional affair and my whole world came crashing down. And when I say that, when you hear that term, I think a lot of people will have their own ideas about what that means and put it on a scale of what's bad and what's not that bad. Mm-hmm. And so for me, my world came crashing down.
Yeah.
But around me, what I was being encouraged to believe and think and say was it's not that bad.
Exactly.
Right. It could have been worse. Meanwhile, I think my husband would say the same, that going through that process of recovery from that, neither of us have ever experienced more pain in our life.
Yeah.
Than that. And so I, like a good, I'm a Christian woman. So like a good Christian woman, I went straight to spiritual leaders for help. We did together because we knew that we wanted to heal together. And so we went straight to spiritual leaders for help, and there just wasn't an understanding or language around trauma, myself included. I was completely ignorant to what I was experiencing. And so I was having major trauma responses, and because I didn't have language and those around me didn't have language, it was interpreted as bad and wrong and even evil. And so then I'm trying to deal with all of this bad, wrong, evil stuff that's coming up inside of me in the way that I know how, via the church. And there were some good things and some healing things that happened there. And we got to a place of kind of relative peace. But what I realized was, for me to hold on to that peace, I had to deny so much about what I knew, what was true inside of me. And I know that you and I've talked about this, and that's what you would say is cognitive dissonance, right? So exactly. I started about a year and a half after the discovery, after going through a lot of deep inner healing work. I'm still not okay, but I'm wanting to be okay. It's that people pleaser part of me that I wasn't aware of. My sense of belonging was at risk, right? Like exactly. if I'm not walking in victory, if I'm not, because if I'm not, then there's something wrong with me. And the something wrong with me is a bad thing that I've opened a door to. And I very much believed that at the time. So I'm not faulting anybody for that belief. I very much believe that. But a year and a half later, I come across the term betrayal trauma. And I start listening to people who are talking about this, like Dr. Jake Porter and Tammy Gustafson and other people on Instagram. And I'm seeing their explanation of the trauma responses that happen with betrayal trauma. And I mean, I could just check them off the list. This is what I was experiencing. I wasn't dealing with a demon. I was dealing. I know it's like so hard to even talk about this right now, because I'm so far from that point. But that is what was the language that, was present. So exactly. The cognitive dissonance got so intense as I'm intaking this information. It feels so true to the deep part of me. And I'm fighting with this belief over here that I've had. It got so deep, it sent me into just a really deep depression, which I'm grateful that happened, because it forced me to reach out for help. And I found a coach who specialized in betrayal trauma. And then I began my own work, and then my husband began his own work, and we did a deep year-long marriage recovery process. Yeah. And so all of that informs what I do. Even if people can't connect with the action, there are things that are so similar for all of us. There's grief. There's the things that, we haven't given ourselves permission to name. So we can't grieve it. And if we can't grieve it, we can't move forward. Exactly. And if we feel like it's wrong or bad to have these trauma responses, how can we respond in compassion to ourselves? Well, it's just that whole process that led me to, going through my own trauma recovery. I became aware, and I had to come to terms with that some of the ways that things unfolded created more trauma for me. Yes. And it was not ever the intent, but the impact was there. And so I had to acknowledge that, and I had to learn how to work through the grief and the pain and the anger that was very present. Yeah. around that.
I want us to continue talking about that, but I want to stop and back up because we're going to cover how it's almost like there was double layers, right? So there's the initial wounding, but then there can be additional wounding when you're reaching out for help. That is not intentional, but it still needs to be addressed. But I want to back up with something that you said about that belief that there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
I want to juxtapose two things where you said you had this belief that you were wrestling with, that there's something wrong with me. And then I also want to talk about how you are grateful for your depression. Those are two things I really want to highlight today. But can you give us a little more about what did that feel like? Because I think when we say that we're somatic informed, another word for it is embodied. Somatic just means it's about your body. And I think a lot of our culture in the world, but especially in the church, and if you're not Christian, I think you can find things that you can still relate to. I believe it's Phil Rosenthal, who was the writer on Everybody Loves Raymond, talks about in terms of when you're storytelling or you're being a creator, the more specific you are about your own experiences, the more global and relatable we become. So that's cross-cultural, but it's also cross religions. So I hope that there's something you find, because we're going to have people from all backgrounds as guests on this podcast. But Heidi and I did come out of Christian homes, so that's just who we are. We're just sharing from our journeys. But tell us more about what can "there's something wrong with me" feel like in your body. What are the types of experiences that we've talked about before, where you're just like you're having trouble staying present, or other things that you can feel like other women can relate to here?
Well, I think the trauma showed up in my body in a very tangible way. I think I've told you the story of I'm driving my son to a friend's house in a different town, and I need my GPS to get back home because I don't know where I am. And so this is probably a couple months after the original discovery. And I am driving and the GPS says turn left, and I cannot remember which way is left.
Yeah.
Like no matter how hard I try, like the information is just not, my brain was very fuzzy, very foggy. My body, when I went to the doctor, was like stage 3 adrenal fatigue. Like my adrenals just weren't even firing at all. So there were very profound physical experiences happening. But at that time, I didn't connect that with the trauma. Like I didn't give myself and wasn't given permission to say, this is connected. Right. Which I was given that permission a year and a half later. And that took so much of the burden off of me to just say, this is how my body responded. It's not because I did a bunch of things wrong that I'm here.
Exactly.
I don't know if that answered your question, but
it certainly does. I think,
there are just a lot of physical aspects. I think the more we describe
what it feels like in our body, I noticed that even some women, I know even for myself, I was someone who I wasn't in touch with my emotions, and I definitely wasn't in touch with how they could show up in my body. So it literally took me 10 years of using prompts in a feelings journal that I got from some counselors to even identify. Because otherwise, if you'd ask me how I'm feeling, I would say I'm fine. There's happy, angry, and sad, and I shouldn't be angry or sad, so I'm going to be fine. And it took a lot of practice to get there. And I remember having a discussion with some of my cousins and realizing they may have physical symptoms of depression and anxiety, but they didn't recognize it was depression and anxiety. They were addressing it purely as medical.
Exactly.
And then, take it a step further when you become somatic trauma informed and you realize the depression and anxiety isn't bad. It's an indicator light of like, hey, let's get curious. Why is this showing up in this way in my body? And for me, anxiety started showing up as a pressure in my chest. Or I started with panic attacks, actually. It wasn't like full blown panic attack where I had to go to the ER. But I realized that if we don't have conversations, we don't know how to connect the dots, and we don't know what we're feeling or what we're talking about. So I think it's so important. What are other ways? Because you are so good at this. Heidi has a gift. If you're looking for a coach, you can book a discovery call. Look her up at Heidi Mills Writes on Instagram. We're going to put all of her details in the show notes. And for sure, being a part of her Soul Care 75 group, to be in a group where someone's holding space for you to slow down, to be aware of what's happening in your body is huge, and to connect the dots. So what are other common ways that you feel like it can show up?
Yeah, I think a lot of us, for me, myself, I know I was very disembodied, and and partially because, this is going really into another conversation, but a lot of the Christian groups that I've been around, I would say have a pretty strong Gnostic influence that makes you separate your spirit and soul and body, right?
Yes.
So the body has been communicated as the place where bad things happen. It's the flesh. It's the, that's a whole separate conversation. But the ways it showed up for me, it was similar. I mean, I had intense, actually, it wasn't right away. It was a year and a half later when I started really having that dissonance where I was learning these things. I knew it was true, what I was experiencing. And then I had these beliefs over here and they weren't matching up. That's when my body really started responding to me. And I had intense flutters in my chest, like to the point where I'm like, do I need to go to the hospital? And maybe I did. I don't know. But I also knew it was related. Like I could tell, like, this is related. So I just started easing into feeling and listening to how my body was responding to information. And then even when I started doing the betrayal trauma work, when I would be going through a deep or hard week, I mean, there were strong physical symptoms because I was trying to approach it from an all or nothing, like, let's just get this done, right? Like, let's go all in and get this done. And so
that's right.
my body was,
we're fix-it people.
My body was saying, no, slow down.
Exactly.
Like there's a pacing that, I needed to attend to. And
so we need to stop there. We need to just address forgiveness and talk about what forgiveness is and what forgiveness isn't.
Yeah. And forgiveness
isn't reconciliation. Do you want to address that?
Forgiveness is not reconciliation. And I also would like to say that forgiveness is not necessarily the first step to your healing.
Exactly.
I'll circle back to that. But forgiveness is not reconciliation. And so forgiveness is a personal, internal process that you go on when you're ready in your healing journey. And nobody else has to participate in that. And that's just for you to untether yourself from the situation or the other person, if you're ready and if you're willing to go there. But what we get confused about is that forgiveness is supposed to mean restoration or reconciliation. And that needs to be earned by restoring safety in the relationship. So if there's been a breach of trust or harm, this could be in a friendship or family, then the one who has broken the trust is responsible to ask or to do what is needed to repair with the other person. And the one who has been harmed needs to say, this is what repair looks like to me. And if you can't do that, then we can't repair.
Yeah.
And so like there's so many times where we just say, just forgive, as if that's going to answer all of the problems, but it's not. So for me, that was such a wrestle. And maybe it was that cognitive dissonance. There was such an internal wrestle in me of trying to forgive the two people in my life that had really harmed me by their choices, but having all of these big emotions that needed to be seen and heard and felt. And so it was this enormous wrestle until I went through the trauma recovery and I heard, let's just put forgiveness on the shelf for now. And let's deal with the emotions that need to be heard. And
So good.
It took all the pressure off. It took the wrestle went away, and I could just, and so I say that to people too. It's like we push this, especially in the church, we push it so hard to forgive quickly, but how can you forgive what you haven't yet named?
Exactly.
You have to name
the
harm, and you have to not only name it, you have to feel it. You have to feel the impact of it. You have to notice it, recognize it. All of those things, move through it. And then if you're willing and you're ready, somewhere down the line, I think it was Dr. Omar Minwala say that forgiveness it's kind of a natural ending of a healing process that's done well. You get to that place where you just want to be free, so you're ready to let that thing go. But it really doesn't have anything to do with the other person or restoring that place that they had in your life.
Right.
Do you have anything more to say on that?
I just can't even tell you how profound that is. And I think that really needed to be heard today, is to take the pressure off yourself and give yourself time to even get there. You don't have to get there right now. And you don't have to get there to start your healing process. I think that is so incredibly profound. So, and that also there is work to be done individually. If this is a situation of betrayal trauma or covert abuse, that each person has their own responsibilities, and that's such a huge part. And you can't have the victim at all or the survivor be responsible for any of the abuser's work whatsoever. And there has to be safe space for each person to separately do their own work.
It wouldn't be healing if the other person didn't take radical ownership of their behavior, because radical ownership of behavior is the very first step of recovery. So if there's no ownership of behavior, you're getting nowhere. Yeah.
It's profound. I think it's incredibly profound to be able to go from a place where there's a cognitive dissonance. I know that's a big word. And I'm actually in process of co-authoring a book about this very topic. But it's where what you're believing and what you're living are incongruent and like battling one another. And you feel like you're in this web and you're trying to make sense of this swirl, and it's gnarly. But the more you try to untangle it, the bigger the mess it gets. And it's in that place where you start to doubt your own reality, especially if you're coming from a place of either covert abuse or where there's been really intense deception and betrayal. And you're really wrestling with, there must be something wrong with my perception of reality, or there's something wrong with me, or the way that my body is responding, that there's something wrong. To be able to go from that place to get to a place where you can say that you are grateful for your depression. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I know you and I just talked about this the other day, but just talk about that journey and why you're grateful for the depression.
And this is a newer development, I think, just in my healing process, where I could say I'm grateful for a lot of elements of all of it, even though I would never wish that experience upon anyone else. The depression, what I was feeling was so intense that it forced me to go get help, and it forced me to get the right kind of help that I needed. And I would not be where I am today. And I would never be able to sit in somebody else's story had I not gone through and sat in my own and really gone to the depths of that experience. And this is still a process. I'm not by no means saying I've arrived, but the ability to sit with somebody else, it happens when you learn to be with what you can feel, what you feel,
Exactly.
I think that's Hillary McBride. We heal when we learn to be with what we feel. And I didn't know how to do that before. And none of my Christian background equipped me to do that.
Right.
I didn't know how to be with anxiety. I didn't know how to be with depression. That was all bad.
Exactly.
And And now I have a perspective of like, that is all human. That is all part of our humanity. It's a part of who we are. And God put those indicators in us so that we take action, so that we, reach out. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like a double whammy, because it's like you're already having trouble sitting with yourself, but it's not only that, it's that we've been taught that it's wrong to entertain it at all. So you're actually taught to rebuke it or cast it out.
Exactly.
And it's like, no, God created science and he created psychology. Like, you can't create something that he didn't create. So, and we're not going to go into that theology here, but this is just our own process. And when you get to that point, and a lot of this comes from internal family systems, so you can look that up if you're new to it, but there's parts of you. You are the sum of many parts. And when you can change your language, and instead of identifying with anxiety or depression as an identity, and there's just a part of you that is manifesting this anxiety, depression, and there's a reason why. And that part of you, if you can think of it like a little child often, which I'm not going to go into explaining what IFS is, but a lot of times you have to sit with this child. And before I even learned about IFS, I actually had a mentor and a friend who was holding space for me before Heidi came along. She came along in such perfect timing, who recommended that I actually get a picture of my 7-year-old self, or whatever age that you connect with, like your 3-year-old, your 7-year-old self, and just say, Nini, what do you need today? It's some people call it reparenting yourself. And so there's a need for that, of honoring, like, hey, I recognize you're showing up as procrastination today. There's a part of me that is showing up as procrastination today. And get curious. Those are the two things that I've learned. Like, okay, Nini, we're going to notice what we're noticing, and we're going to get curious. And having other people hold space for you, what you're describing is the attunement of being able to attune to yourself. We were created to heal in community. And when you have attunement from others, whether it be a coach or a group, it takes that healing to another level, right?
100%.
Yeah. And so I'm the same way. Like, I actually read about in covert narcissistic abuse, there's a term called neurosis. And I obviously am someone who, I don't like the word victim. I'll use it interchangeably with survivor. But sometimes it's necessary to use the word victim to make it very clear, to define for someone. They need that clarity of, yes, you have been a victim and that is not your responsibility. But oftentimes victims of covert abuse will hit this place of what's called neurosis. It's a clinical term. And it's actually when you get to a place that you could see it as a good thing, because if you didn't have the neuroses, especially if you are someone who is strong and resourceful and you're a fix-it person, you go in with solutions, you'll just keep fixing it until it's detrimental to your own physical health, right? So it's our physical health, and it's the depression and anxiety that get our attention to help us pay attention, like, well, something's off here and we need a course correct somewhere. And so, you and I talked about how we need to define what abuse is, because I think that can seem so shocking and harsh to some people. What was it that was helpful for you? And I'll let you say the definition of abuse that you got we actually got from Bob Hamp.
I got it from
But
you,
how is it helpful
Nini.
for you?
It was so helpful. So Bob Hamp, and correct me if I'm misquoting him, but I think he says that abuse is simply misplaced responsibility.
Yes.
Is that correct? Yeah.
It is correct, yes.
So when I hear that definition, because abuse is a big and scary word, and it can mean a lot of things. But at the core, it's misplacing responsibility. And when I hear that, it opens up a lot of things for me. And I can even see times I've done that, right? Where I've put responsibility improperly on somebody else.
Well, I think that's the perfect place to say, this is where a discussion about codependency and boundaries comes in, which Heidi does have a boundaries worksheet download that we'll link in the show notes. But as you and I started talking about it, we discussed about how we have this love-hate relationship with the word even codependency.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you get to someone who's been through betrayal trauma or covert abuse, we're already struggling with taking responsibility for things that are not ours. Uh-huh. So the conversations around codependency can often be mistaken as giving you even more responsibility for you being codependent.
Right.
When the reality of being, especially in the Christian church, and this is for women that need to hear it today, that it is extra hard to even come to terms with the fact that the very things that we were taught was the good Christian thing to do, whether it be being a good mom or a good wife or a good sister or a good friend or a good daughter, are actually the things that can keep us in a place of unhealthy codependent behaviors and even keep us in the place of abuse. And there's an intense level of sifting through and sorting through the cognitive dissonance of what's true and what's not.
Mm-hmm.
Like, where do we even want to go from here, Heidi? I know there's...
I think it changed. Really deep. There's one other thing I want to remember to circle back to, but I think it changed everything for me when I understood. I took a codependent tendencies test. It was part of my trauma recovery. And so It was just a bunch of statements, and I'm supposed to check the ones that, are the behaviors that I see in myself, which I now realize I wasn't very honest with at the time, but that's okay.
Yeah. Yes.
And so I'm going through and I'm checking these behaviors, and then you get to the end and it said, okay, now go back and put a capital T next to the ones that were present because of trauma. Well, all of them were present because of trauma. So it really helped me. I've heard the verbiage where codependency is really a grasp for safety at its core. Even if the behavior looks controlling, it's a grasp for safety. And in that time before we went through recovery, that time before that, there was no safety established in the relationship because I'm sorry is not safe enough. And I won't do that again is not safe enough for the body, right? Like you said, we have a lot of parts of ourselves that are going through the healing. So safety has to be established internally in yourself and in your environment. That's through a lot of different things, but partially boundaries.
Yeah.
So that you can feel safe enough to move forward in healing. And that's when you can unravel the codependent tendencies and start to face them and change behavior. But if there's not safety, it makes sense. It makes sense that you're there. And there's no shame. There should not be any shame. And I think that that's the fear when we talk about I am codependent or you're acting codependent. It feels like shameful, like you're doing something wrong. No, you're doing something for survival. You're grasping for safety.
Right. Because that's where the lie can come in, that I'm in this position because I'm codependent, that you're taking on responsibility of the abuser's behavior. And that's not okay. That's not what we're doing here.
To be fair, that is what we're told. I mean, I'm not alone in being told immediately, what was your part in this?
Let's talk about that. So that's the second layer, like where we have the initial wound and we're trying to make sense of the mess, and that's what we want to be heard today is, I know both of us needed to hear in our process, you make sense.
Yeah.
You're not crazy.
No.
And I needed it to be repeated to me every day. I'm not exaggerating. And it was like divine intervention in a way where I would hear it from someone different almost on a daily basis for a couple years in order to be able to come out of the place that I was in.
Yeah.
So let's talk about how it's not uncommon, unfortunately, when you've gone through betrayal trauma or recovering from covert abuse, where you go to get help. And this isn't just in the Christian world, you guys. This is universal. Where you go to get help, and there's additional hurt from the help.
Yeah, and I've heard so many different stories that, you know, this is partially something I wanted to circle back to, is the it's not that bad topic.
Yes, exactly.
Where, like, let's say a woman discovers her husband's had a secret use of porn, and our society just kind of says, well, that's not that bad, it's normal, right? Like, that's just what happens. But if it is not consensual in that marriage, it is a secret, and the behaviors that go along with keeping a secret are psychologically damaging.
Exactly.
So then you have abusive behaviors happening. And so if it's that bad for you, it's bad enough. I can't say that enough. Like, if it's bad enough for you, it is bad. And you don't have to prove it. You don't need validation. If you're feeling it in your body, if you're feeling it in your heart, it's bad enough. But your question was, what's your part in this? And, you know, eventually, deep, way far down in the recovery process, you certainly learn about your own attachment wounds, and you learn about all of the things that you bring to the table. And that's part of your own personal healing. But when you're coming for help, whether it's abuse or infidelity, the person who is harming is at fault. And they are 100% responsible for their behavior.
Yep.
And so it's just like, it's such a painful thing to put the responsibility again on the one who's been harmed. And I don't mean to say it's, you know, only women, but it's statistically much higher that it's a woman.
Yes.
So if I say women, I'm not discounting that there are men out there that have this experience, but it's mostly women. And then they're already told that they're responsible, like they are responsible for keeping their husband's attention. They are responsible for keeping the thermostat of the home. They are how much are we responsible for that we're told we're responsible for? We already have that. We already feel like we must have done something wrong. And then we go to get help, and it's just confirmed. That shame is just piled on there. Like, yes, you must have done something wrong, which I'm sure was not the intent, maybe not the intent by that statement, but that is how it lands, and that is how it feels when you're in that place. And so this is where I just feel, you know, as you and I are going down this road to be trauma-informed coaches, I feel it is so necessary. If you're going to be helping hurting people, whether you're a pastor or just a leader in a church or on the prayer ministry team, you need to be trauma and abuse informed, because there's a lot of abuse happening in our churches.
Right.
And it's going invalidated, and it's going unheard, and the women just have nowhere that is safe for them to land. Now, I don't want to say nowhere. There are people that are doing good work in this arena, and there are certainly groups that have resources for churches, for infidelity, for betrayal, and for abuse. But there's very few churches that are using them. Right.
It's
I can't even speak
on the rise.
I can't even speak to what that is like outside of the church, because I just don't have that experience. But I would imagine it's also there.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Especially when it comes to covert narcissistic abuse. Whether you're in the church or not, it doesn't matter. It's hard to find trauma-informed and especially somatic help, where they're also helping you recognize what's happening in your body. And I think that leads to the question of, I think for me in the process, and I'm not sure what your experience was, but even if someone says that they're a trauma-informed specialist, I have to ask, what does trauma informed mean to you? And especially for me personally, growing in being aware of what I feel and what I feel in my body, there's quantum physics involved here, and I'm not going to get all into that, but you don't know what you don't know when you're sitting with someone. It could be a tone of voice. It could be inflections, or it could be even body language that could potentially be triggering from something in your past that you're unaware of. So just because you don't find safety with a person doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad. You don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but it's okay to get curious and follow. Your body was created to heal itself. And there's actually studies now, especially in the somatic trauma informed field, where they're realizing it's not a brain-body connection. Actually, it's one. Your body is your brain, and your brain is your body. They're very much one and connected. They work together as one. And so it's okay to honor what you're feeling in your body in order to reprogram and rewire your brain for the healing that is necessary to get out of wherever you're feeling stuck. And so I had to recognize that, like, hey, sometimes even though the person says they're trauma-informed, doesn't necessarily mean I feel safe and that it's conducive for my healing. And it's okay for me to, like, when you know, your body will let you know when it's a safe place to heal.
It makes me think of that. You don't have to know what it is to know that it is. Right? Like, so you don't have to know what is happening to know that it is happening.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's where the cognitive dissonance starts to really mess with us, when we're trying to say, oh, but this is bad, or it's not that bad. And then we're stuck in a loop and we can't get out. And then going back to when we're also getting extra input from outside voices, that it's not that bad, or putting responsibility on the survivor or victim that isn't theirs. Do you want to talk a little bit about, you and I had discussed on how sometimes there are certain tendencies that are systemic. It doesn't necessarily mean that the person you're going to is an abuser, but in the culture or spiritual communities, there are certain systemic issues that it's not dishonoring to recognize where you're being wounded. You need to, in order to release forgiveness for yourself. So I'm going to combine kind of all those topics there together, but do you want to speak a little bit into that?
And I mean, I don't want to speak as an expert, because, like, these are things we are processing through as we go on our own journey. But I can speak to it as just experiencing it, that I think what I notice is, especially in the types of churches and Christian groups that I've been in, there seems to be a real fear, not understanding of psychology. And so it's just moved over to this category of, like, we don't go there.
Right.
And because of that, we're like 30 years behind in knowing how to heal trauma. And so there's these very old teachings before they had the science. We didn't have the science, right? So there are these old teachings that have just carried on and carried through, but they're still very present, and they do compound the trauma. I mean, I don't remember if I already said this, but when I did start working through my trauma recovery, I realized that some of these things compounded the trauma to where it was like double what it needed to be, just because the processes weren't there and the understanding wasn't there. And we have this information. It's not that we know everything about the brain. It's not that we know everything about trauma, but we have a lot of information, a lot of evidence-based processes. And I think it's the disconnect that it's not widely accepted in parts of the church, it's causing so much harm. And then when
Right.
you go outside of that because you're desperate and you need help, then you're dealing with all of this. Is this bad? Is this wrong? But it's healing me, but I'm getting better. But
Yes,
I feel whole and
exactly.
integrated, and I felt fragmented over here.
Yes, it's so true. And I remember being in a place where it's like, this isn't even denial. I just lack so much awareness. And it was a long journey. So if you're in midst of that journey, it's so important. I think that one of the most important affirmations I learned is slower is faster. And it is so true when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
somatic healing in the brain. That slower is faster, and you have to be kind to yourself. And the feelings of you're going to have them and you can sit with them, but just that inner critic that is a part of us that's like, again, it'll pipe up often like, it's not that bad, why can't you get over it by now, like, why are you still feeling this way, actually can slow down the process in an unhelpful way.
I want to say is like, this is, this informing our work, you and I, it does not mean that we only work with people who have experienced this, because all of us
Right.
have not, nobody has come out of childhood unscathed. Nobody can be
Exactly.
living in this world without experiencing trauma. And so you don't have to have the same background for the principles to be the same. And I think that's where Soul Care 75 came into play, is that was really to help anybody who's hit a place of complete burnout. My complete burnout came this way, but yours might have come another way. And let's
Mm-hmm.
backtrack and figure out how we can get into our bodies. How can we reorder our lives so maybe we don't get there again.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly it. And finding healthy ways to slow down and honor ourselves. Which leads us, should we just dive into it?
Let's
Because
just
we are
dive
still
into
going to
it.
review a movie today. I love it so much because, you guys, this is how big of a fan Heidi is of the Breaking Script podcast. When I gave her options of I gave her two options of which movies to review, and she's like, obviously it's going to be the Tyler Hynes one. She made my day. It brought me so much joy. So that's how we're going to introduce that today's movie is On the 12th Date of Christmas, which stars Mallory Jansen, who plays Jennifer, and Tyler Hynes, who plays Aiden. This is about two seemingly incompatible game designers, very interesting profession, who team up to create a romantic citywide scavenger hunt that is themed for the 12 days of Christmas. The setting is Chicago, and it is super magical. We're changing it up a little bit. We're just doing an overall rating before we dive straight into our breakdown. Did you have, out of 10 bobas, Heidi, what was the overall rating for this movie for you?
I'm still not sure if this is too generous, but I gave it a 7.5.
I am stunned. Wow, that's higher than me. I gave it a 7.
I'm not sure
so
about it. But I think when I get to the glimmers part, I will explain why there's a little extra.
Okay.
Because, yeah, it does feel generous. It definitely feels generous.
Okay, well, let's move on to the What's Love Got to Do with It, where we cover glimmers, what we love, and breaking down the romantic and family relationships. What kind of glimmers did you want to start off with here?
Oh, Christmas in the City. That was gorgeous. Just beautiful.
Yes.
All of the lights. And I remember Christmas in the City. So that was just beautiful. The decor, the lights, all the feels. All the feels.
Exactly. Same for me. The Chicago adventures, the fact that they showed the waterfront, in all the Christmas as they went around town, that was also my favorite. My other glimmer, which I thought it was so adorable, was the brother-sister relationship.
Oh,
that was a glimmer for me. We can break it down, but huge glimmer of how a brother is helping a sister while her husband is deployed. And then to go beyond that, his relationship with his niece It made me very
Yes.
nostalgic because I definitely have friends that are uncles to my kids who were not, blood related, but I was like, oh my gosh, he has full on uncle vibes. And fun fact, if you go to Tyler Hynes' Instagram, in real life, he's actually a real life, like, fun uncle. I was like, oh, that's why he has that vibe, because in real life, he is that uncle. Same like when
it
kids
seemed
have.
very natural to him. Definitely seemed natural for him.
Right? That he's making wreaths with his niece.
I think that's why it was so hard to go back and forth from like the grumpy version of him at work and then the version with his family at home, where this is one of my glimmers, that he was sitting down and folding laundry. I love that they showed him folding laundry. I wrote down all these things that I was like, these were really good things they did in writing, and that's why I gave them more points. Was there were so many women who had named speaking parts. And that's one thing that I've heard Sheila Gregor, like, they have a whole rubric in movies about women having a named and speaking part. And in this movie, they nailed that. There were so many women who had, you knew what their name was, and they got to speak. And they were dynamic. And they weren't looking to be rescued. So that's why I gave them higher points. The way Jennifer... Yes. Yeah, the way Jennifer showed up in the meetings and the support that she got from Wanda, like, that was incredible.
That was my biggest one, was woman to woman saying, you need to speak up more, and clearly giving her the opportunity and paving the way for her. And she was getting the same feedback from girlfriends as she was professionally from other women, was like, yes, that's exactly what we need more of in real life. Like, wow, Hallmark, you did a really good job there.
Good job, Hallmark.
I love that. I felt that was very relatable to me, was when I believe it was Wanda who was giving Jennifer advice. Like, yeah, I can relate. At one time, I was intimidated into staying silent. That was in me. But she pointed out very specifically, like, you clearly don't lack confidence in your ideas. Right. So why aren't you claiming that? Why aren't you speaking up more? And that goes back to, I think I spoke on a previous episode about a mentor who was very clear with me, because at the time I was in a caretaker role. And so she was trying to explain, like, be careful if you're in a caretaker role, whether it be the way that you're taking care of a child or a sick parent or a grandparent. Oftentimes the caretaker can get ill and even pass on before the invalid, before the patient. And so it's really profound. And she was emphasizing the fact that oftentimes caretakers won't speak up. Or that can apply to someone who's going through betrayal trauma or covert abuse, where you're afraid to speak up. And that speaking up is so important. Find a safe space to speak up if you're not ready to speak up in general. If you need a place to, like, practice and show up for yourself and speak up. Don't you think that's a huge part of the process?
It's so huge. I think it's so huge. And I love, like, we should all be these kind of women. So that's why it got a higher rating, because that's not common to see. And Hallmark, especially not in Hallmark, I think.
Yeah.
And so I really loved that. It, like, all of these women were capable. They were strong. They were smart. They were loving and kind and tender. They were all of the things that we are. They were kind of deep, now that I think about it. They felt shallow at first, but now that I think about it, I'm like, they were really deep, and they showed up well.
Yeah. It might not show up as good entertainment, but this was, like, really good and healthy. Like, I thought it was really healthy that Jennifer's character was very self-aware and accepted the fact and knew that she worked better in collaboration with others than alone.
That was on my glimmer too. That line.
I feel like our notes are going to be really similar.
I was like, yes.
I love it. Self-awareness. I mean, come on. The self-awareness was huge. The way that they prioritized family, like the work-life balance, I felt like was portrayed so well. Like, even when Jennifer and Aiden were supposed to continue working together, they had a deadline. But Aiden was like, nope, it's Skype night. I got to go back and Skype with the family because the brother-in-law was going to be Skyping in and he wanted to be there. Like, how
That's so
precious
sweet.
is that?
Yeah.
I know. I love it so much. Do you have anything else for this section?
I do I want to mention, like, even though Aiden's character was kind of grumpy, he did very much praise Jennifer's work. You know, he praised her work verbally and like to her and to their boss. And so that was just another thing.
Yeah.
Because he didn't have to. Good. He could have just taken credit.
Exactly. Yeah, it ended up being something that was really healthy. I'm going to expound more on that in the next section. Are you ready to move on?
Yes.
When we get to the, don't go chasing waterfalls. I was really surprised that I didn't have to bring out the omo, I don't want no scrub nardar in this section, because exactly like what you were saying, if Aiden continued the way that he was going at work and the movie ended with that same behavior, then I would have pulled it out.
Right.
But because of the fact that I think this is one of those situations where it's like you don't know until you've observed over time patterns where the way he showed up at work very much seemed like, oh, this is a guy who is just very stressed in his personal life. And I felt like he could be, we don't know enough, right? Because this is just a snapshot of someone's life. But he could be codependent in the sense that if he's taking on so much, like there was a comment that he made when I think the electricity went out, or I can't remember what it was that went out, but he said, everyone remain calm. I'm going to fix everything.
Yes.
So there is that, like, really the glimmer of him helping his sister was really good, but that could be unhealthy where he's taking on things that aren't 100%. His. And can we talk about how that could be a covert narcissist? That is like huge waving red flag of the codependent. I've heard so many therapists say, well, he can't be a narcissist. He can't have narcissistic personality disorder because he's too codependent. That is some type of old training, because I'm hearing more and more experts come out and say that is absolutely not true. Covert narcissists are very much codependent, people pleasers. They look like the selfless one that's doing everything, can fix everything, can be selfless and come in and be the rescuer.
Yeah, that's what I was just about to ask. Is that like a rescuer kind of like hero complex?
Very much so. But it presents so differently from the overt that people miss it. They don't see it. They're like, and that actually makes the cognitive dissonance and abuse even worse, because everyone else is seeing someone who's so selfless and serving. And there's only maybe one or two people in that narcissist, and even sociopathic can be like this too, which we're splitting hairs here. But where it's like, that makes the psychological abuse even worse, because no one else can see it and no one else can validate. So anyway, we won't go off on that, because actually in this one it turned out healthy. But can we talk about how in real life it can, right? He did go back and forth. It's true, which in real life that could be done for manipulation. So we don't know.
Sure.
But it was shown very healthy here. And I just thought that was my biggest thing there, is like, I think it was really hard for me, as you mentioned, how grumpy and Lone Ranger he was towards Jennifer specifically. Like, it was really rude and shocking.
Yeah. It was hard to like Tyler. It was hard to like him in that role. And I also could tell a little bit, like, that doesn't suit you. You know, like he was having a hard time being that guy. I'm just putting that in there. Yeah.
I love it. You've become a true fan. It's like blessing my heart so much. But yeah, like he started off by saying, is this your thing? Like, you just blurt things out. And then he followed that up by mansplaining.
Uh-huh.
Immediately.
He was rough.
That was a huge, like, yeah, it was so rough. So, and then he doesn't let her, like, he kept cutting her off on phone calls. Like,
yeah, that was bad.
And then In response to that, though, this part is Jennifer's responsibility. But it was like a sucky situation where she had to come in and be like, when they were talking about, let's compare notes. And he just is saying, like, he's deflecting and he's turning her down and saying, I work better as a Lone Ranger. She actually said, let's read yours so I can learn.
Oh, that line, I just wanted to like, bleh.
Major trigger.
Yeah.
Because I used to be that person. I know. Because you're feeding into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that and like, a little bit, like we could talk about how she's very sweet to be baking everybody's cookies, but why is she baking everybody cookies? Right?
Yes,
like that can be just a nice thing, or it can be people pleasing, like I need you to like me. And so I'm going to make you cookies, and I'm even going to carry them around in my purse for you in case you want one.
So extreme.
Yeah, and that line when she said, so I can learn, I was like, oh gosh, so we just have gone into, I have to stroke his ego to get the response I need.
Aww. Yeah. It was majorly triggering because I was like, oh, I remember. Because then you play into manipulative behavior also, and it's just not good all around. But I'm so glad it ended up working out. Because it was a Tyler Hynes movie, I feel like I'm biased and I don't like to tear them apart as much. Because then it all falls apart.
Yeah, make it all fall apart.
I know.
No, I really didn't have much.
So moving on into the oi with the poodles already, where we talk about plot holes, continuity issues, the wait what's, what we didn't like. Actually, usually this is my longest section. I felt like I didn't want to go as much here. I probably could have, but I just didn't want to. I only had a couple things. I had, where is this company? That all they do is come up with, they have a game creator as an executive position. Like, yes, please put me there. Big City Quest. Where are these companies? That was my biggest one. What did you have here? Oh my gosh,
I have so many. I'm so sorry. I don't want to rip this apart.
No, let's do it. This is good. It's a healthy balance for me because it's usually me, so it's perfect.
How did she practically get all the decor up to her office? I'm just trying to think through how many trips. I mean, we watched them walk down this spiral staircase. So, like, is that how she gets to her office? Is she dragging a tree up the spiral staircase? How many boxes of ornaments? Like,
how long did this take?
That.
Yeah.
How long did this take?
It's such a good one.
Yeah.
I'm so proud. Yeah. It's exactly stuff like that. Keep going.
Okay. I had the wait, what? Like, did she stay on FaceTime all night with Grandma? She was straight home from work, baking cookies. Grandma called. They're going to roll cookies out. The next time we see them, she's in her jammies on the FaceTime with Grandma still. So that's so sweet. Like, I don't have a relationship like that with a grandparent, but I'm like, were they literally on FaceTime all night? Did she say, hang on, I need to go put my pajamas on? That was just a wait,
it's
what?
So true. Yes.
The biking in winter. I don't live in Chicago. Maybe that's totally normal. We shut down when there's ice or snow, so it's really hard to imagine somebody like, I'm riding a bike in the ice and the snow. And the second time I watched the movie, I did catch a conversation about it between Aiden and Jennifer. They actually talked about it when they were in the hotel.
I love it.
About him biking in the winter.
It's so ridiculous.
I was just like, is that true? Like, do people do that? I don't know. Let me know, those of you who live in
Let us know, weather. People from Chicago. Do you bike still in the winter? Is that even possible with the snow, the salt, like the slippery salt and ice on the ground? Like, that makes no sense.
Okay, I have more.
Keep going. Bring them on.
The amount of food that was served for 3 people at the business lunch, even if it was tapas style, is so small. Like, There's one slice of beef Wellington. Are they going to split that? Who's cutting it and who's going to split it onto, it just was like, this is not enough food. This is not enough food for a lunch.
This is why you and I are soulmates. As you look at the amount of food this is so me. Yes, yeah, I love it.
No. And then this is just a funny thing, but they're walking and she says, "Is there a tree farm around here?" And he goes, "Wait, you don't have a tree?" She didn't say she didn't have a tree. She just asked if there was a tree farm. That was just, I don't know.
It didn't connect. I know.
Can we talk about the 2 to 3 days to develop a romance?
Ugh.
This was maybe 2 or 3 days, right?
That was my biggest one. Yes.
So going from not knowing each other at all to romantically involved.
The huge romantic gesture at the end was like, ooh, it's really rough. That was my biggest one that we would end on, but it would make the whole movie crumble.
I know. I'm
super
sorry.
Fast.
So sorry.
No, this is but this is exactly why I do this, because I turn to my daughters and I say, in real life, this is not healthy. It's not okay.
Right. Like when someone's moving that fast, put the brakes on.
Yeah. Red flags. Exactly. So that leads us to the Jayo Fighting Happily Ever After segment of where we talk about what we think happens after the movie and who we are rooting for. I don't have much here because of the fact of what you just mentioned. I didn't want to say what I really think because it's really unhealthy that they got to that huge romantic gesture in just 2 to 3 days.
Right.
And not always. We can't make always or never blanket statements here.
It could be.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I didn't, I can't say what I really think here. What do you have, Heidi?
I don't have much except what I want to see. I want to see the house restoration. I want to see that thing done.
Yes.
I want to see when all of the carpenters and electricians come in and they restore the house and it's beautiful. Yes. That's what I want to see. Yeah.
Okay, I did have, that was like under my oil with the poodles already, is like the timeline that they were giving of like, oh, it's going to work out perfect. Anybody who's done any kind of house remodeling knows that it never works within our timeline. It always costs more and takes more time, right, Heidi?
100%. And it's a huge mess. But I still wanted to see, I didn't really care much about the relationship between the main characters. It was really hard for me to believe it. And so... And there were those other factors in there that's like, this is just so fast, So I really didn't have much of like caring beyond the movie.
That's where I landed, which means I didn't have a favorite quote either. We usually end with final thoughts, our favorite quotes, and there wasn't a favorite quote. So I was hoping we could end with what you feel like is your top self-care or mental health advice that you want to give today.
You mentioned one of them, which is slow is fast. So I'm a huge proponent of moving at the pace that your body is ready to go. That when you're ready, you will heal as you're ready to in the time that you need to. And then glimmers. Glimmers are huge self-care. Looking for the things that spark safety and connection and joy that are happening all the time, even in the worst moments. It's different than gratitude, because gratitude can feel, again, shaming, and it can feel triggering sometimes. But a glimmer is just like, I'm looking for the smallest bit of goodness that I can savor right now. It could be like a warm drink in your hands, or just the sun on your face. It's just, just reminding your whole system that like there's still goodness, there's still joy, there's still connection. Yeah.
Ugh, that's so good. Just that important distinction between a glimmer and gratitude, I feel like is so important, because sometimes gratitude can end up being a toxic positivity way of like inner criticking ourselves out of something that we need to notice and sit with. So I so appreciate that you said that. Can you tell everyone you have your boundaries worksheet, but can you share also how the Soul Care 75 group and workbook came about?
Are you wanting me to tell the story?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I am.
So
That's what we're going to end with here.
Spent all this time learning to heal my nervous system and going through trauma recovery and learning to go slow and all these things. And then I wasn't feeling really good in my body. I wanted to start working out again. And somebody that I follow posted about a 75 hard, and I signed up. I signed up and I paid the money, and I was like, I'm going to do this because you know what? Old patterns die hard. They die slow.
That's right.
So I sign up, and the next day I come down with COVID. So I'm like, oh, well, I'm out because my body needs to rest. And I messaged the guy who's running the challenge, and he's like, just push through it. Just do it anyway.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, this is not what I know to be true. And that's really where I just started sitting with I got so curious about Heidi, what are you doing? Why did you sign up for this challenge? What were you looking for?
Yeah.
And I was looking for a reset. I was looking for something that would, reset me onto just in a better place. And I just was like, what if there was something like that, like 75? I don't even know if I'm supposed to be naming, but that 75-day challenge. But that 75 days was set apart for your soul and for rewiring and for learning to get in touch with your body if you've been disembodied, and for learning to process your emotions if you haven't been given those tools. What if we set 75 days aside for soul care? And that's when I started Soul Care 75. So, yeah.
And it changed my life, you guys. I was personally significantly impacted by Heidi's Soul Care. I was in her inaugural Soul Care 75 group. So I highly recommend, be sure to sign up for updates. We'll let you know when that is available because it's coming very soon, the Soul Care 75 workbook. But you can actually go to Heidi's Instagram or social media now, and there is a sign up to join her Soul Care 75 email group, or for emails for updates on when the next group is going to be running. So you don't need to wait on that. Thank you so much, Heidi, for doing this with me today.
Thank you for having me, Nini. It was so fun.
And
I feel really honored.
We'll have her back another time. I'm sure we're going to get a lot of feedback and a lot of questions, and wanting her to expound on more things because she has such a gift of holding space. So, and that attunement is incredibly healing. So thanks for breaking script with us. Be sure to follow us so you never miss an episode. Hit the bell so you get the notifications. And Merry Christmas.